Hey Trinity family, this is Pastor Nick, and this is Wednesday's Word, our time in which we spend just a few moments in Scripture together. And I hope you all have been enjoying the Read Scripture Together challenge as we've been working our way through the narrative arc of the Bible. Yesterday, we actually wrapped up the very first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, and today we actually are looking at the book of Exodus, a very famous story. And so for today's reflection, I actually just wanted to look back at the journey that we've been on in the book of Genesis so far. What really stands out to me is how Genesis begins with this really cosmic scope as we look at God and how he created all things with beauty and order and design. And then we saw how we as human beings, we kind of messed it up. In our pride, we rebelled against God. We turned our backs on him. And the result is that not only was our relationship with him broken, but every relationship was broken. Our relationships with each other, our relationship with the created world, it all just kind of goes to chaos. And we see how through like the whole first portion of the book of Genesis, how this whole cosmic story just kind of goes into a downward spiral. We see how humanity becomes more and more wicked, and it ends up in the God finally trying to wipe the slate clean and erase everything with the flood, and then trying to start over again with Noah and his family and how they mess up. And then we get to the Tower of Babel, and again, here's broken humanity continuing to rebel against God. And then we zoom in Genesis chapter 12 to one single family, the family of Abraham. And we've been looking at how with this one single family, although they too are broken and although they too fall short, God makes some incredible promises to them, promises that go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, promises to remake the world and to bless all people through them. And I was just thinking about that shift. There's so much that could be said there, but I was thinking about that shift and how amazing it is that God's salvation plan is worked out in the context of a family. You see, I think that if you're like me, I tend to think in big, sweeping terms. You know, we think about the Bible's call to love, and it's like, yeah, man, we're supposed to love all people. We're supposed to love our neighbors as ourselves. Or I think about forgiveness, and it's like, yes, God forgives me, and we should be forgiving toward others and all that other stuff. But where the rubber really hits the road when it comes to God's promises and his salvation is it really hits the road when it comes to how we live with those who are closest to us, doesn't it? It's one thing to say that we know we're supposed to love all people and forgive all people. It's a whole nother thing when I need to love my family in my home. It's a whole nother thing when I need to show forgiveness to my spouse or to my loved ones or to those who've wronged me. See, God's salvation plan is meant to be lived out in the context of everyday life and everyday relationships. That was really just sticking out to me in the book of Genesis, how this intimate picture of a family, although it has cosmic implications, it's played out in their day-to-day relationships with one another. And oftentimes they don't get it. Oftentimes they mess up and they screw up and they fall short. But what I love is that God continues to love them and pursue them and call them to be a part of his saving work. And he does it in the context of their everyday lives and their everyday relationships. What an appropriate word for us as we're continuing to live in this era of social distancing, this time in which we're spending a ton of time in our homes, a ton of time with our families and our loved ones. And it's just a really good reminder to see those promises of God are not just for the world, they're for us. And they're for how we should live our daily lives. And so my prayer for you is as you've been going through the book of Genesis and as you're now starting in the book of Exodus is to not simply ask the big questions like, wow, what does this passage mean for all of humanity? What does this passage mean for the world? Yes, those are good questions, but to really drill down and say, but what is God saying to me? What is he saying to us in terms of our family and those who live under my roof? What is he saying about my relationships with those who are closest to me? How might I live out these promises in the context of everyday life? See, we can easily get worried about what's coming tomorrow or what's happening in the wider world that we lose focus on what matters most, and that's God wanting his salvation to play out in the day-to-day moments of everyday life. So my encouragement to you, my prayer to you is to really be asking that question, what does this mean for me today? How is this a promise that I need right now? What would this look like in my closest relationships? So that's our moment in the Word for today. I want to encourage you, now that we've wrapped up the book of Genesis, we are going to be doing a live webinar next Monday. So that is May 11th at 8 p.m. in which we're going to answer your questions. Now we're going to be sending out the link for that webinar over the coming days. But what I'd love for you to do today is to share your questions with us. I've included a link with this video, and I would love for you to just click on that link. It's going to take you to a form, and what you can do is you can fill out your questions about the book of Genesis. And all I would ask is that you tell us what part of the book of Genesis you're referencing. So type in the chapter and verse numbers, and then share with us your question. What's the question that you would love to ask? And then during our webinar, we're going to address the questions that you've submitted, and we'll also have a way in which if you're tuning into that webinar live, where you can actually type in your questions real time. And we'll take some time to really dive in, look at the major themes of Genesis together, and address some of the questions that you submit. So take some time to do that today, and then I'll be looking forward to that link to the webinar on our social media pages, on our YouTube page, and via your email. We'll send out that link so that you can join us on Monday evening at 8 p.m. Looking forward to our conversation then. Have a great day and have a blessed week.